Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor Joe Sparrow. And that awed hush that you heard descend on the room is because in this episode we're joined by none other than Stuart Dredge, Music Ally's head of insight. Hello, Stu.
Hello, awed hush. Yes. Is that because everyone's too shocked? I would like Jai again, talking over it.
They're already hanging on your every word, and it's great to have you back. These are always my favourites to record, of course. Now, Stu, this podcast we're doing is we get you in on the ones that are aligned with our latest Insight reports, which come out every few months. And Music Ally's latest Insight report is the International Focus Edition, which pulls together all the last year's worth of country profiles and some extra exclusive international analysis. And if you haven't looked at Music Ally's country profiles for a while, please do, because we've doubled the size of them to include a lot more on-the-ground marketing and audience insight, so that if you're a Music Ally subscriber, you can really learn about what's happening in various countries from people on the ground. Anyway, Stu is here to help me discuss some of the burning topics when we look at the international music market in a global sense right now in the summer of 2025. And those three sort of topics that we've decided to focus on is the dominance of local talent and genres within markets around the world. And then the flip side to that coin, which is that same music being exported to other markets, but local music, which is increasingly reaching global audiences. And also, where does the English language act fit into the newly polyglot paradigm? And then also collaboration as a strategy. This is something that we see now as a standard strategy for gaining momentum in other countries and gathering audiences, but will we reach saturation point? What happens when every song is a feat? Or is there still miles to go? Stu, let's start with the first one there, which is the dominance of local talent, local genres in markets around the world. In some ways, this isn't new. I guess we're talking about it from the perspective of streaming and these sort of measurable modern platforms, because, local music has always been popular locally. But at the same time, what we're really seeing in some markets is these either local genres that were kind of perhaps quite niche before really taking off in that market, or even local dialect music. What have we learned this year about that?
Yeah, well, I think that there was one stat that sort of jumped out at me and encapsulated a lot of it, which was that it was from our Mexico country profile. And I think it was about, in 2023, half of Spotify's 50 top songs in Mexico were by Mexican artists, which when I read that, you're like, well, of course, that sounds normal. But I think it was like 14% in 2014, a decade ago. And that is a country where, I remember that time, we were obviously covering streaming at that time. And I remember people were quite worried and thinking, what if streaming just makes this one global homogenous market where the American and UK stars dominate? And what does this mean, that it's going to be Ed Sheeran stamping on local music around the world forever? No, God bless you, Ed, not your fault.
Imagine Ed Sheeran's boot on the throat of humanity forever.
But there wasn't very study of, will streaming mean that the biggest established stars just dominate everywhere? And what's instead happened is in Mexico, Mexican artists are coming to the fore, and that's happening in Germany, in France, in all manner of countries around the world, where what was expected or what was feared to happen hasn't. And I think the other thing is that there are countries that have always been like this. So, for example, like South Korea and Japan and China, they've always been very heavily dominated by local artists. It's difficult as internationals to make a big inroads there in terms of the top chart positions. There's some kind of crossover between them. So South Korean artists do well in Japan and so on. But countries like Mexico, it's very exciting. I mean, France is very exciting. I know there, when we see the new figures from the kind of the label bodies, they talk about how much of the charts now are French-speaking French artists or French-speaking African artists.
Yes,
they're very excited.
Which was always kind of mandated, wasn't it, in France, in a sort of top-down way, that in France in particular, to preserve the...
On radio, it was a big thing, wasn't it?
The status of the language. There had to be a significant percentage, a majority percentage of music on the radio had to be French language. And of course, it seems to have worked pretty well.
But the fact that you do that suggests that there is a threat that you see.
Exactly.
Think that they're going to struggle.
And now it's been driven from the bottom of the pyramid, which is people who are that's their language they want to communicate in, and they're communicating with that community, and it's going from the bottom up. Same, I live here in Berlin. It's the same here. There's been a huge rejuvenation of German language pop driven by young artists. And it's a trend, isn't it, that's happening around the world.
It is in established markets, in emerging markets. And I think what happens then is, as that starts, it becomes this virtuous cycle for two reasons, I think. So the first reason is that as more local acts do really well, that spurs investment in those kind of artists, more signings, more development. Labels kind of put, if the big global labels put more welly into their local offices and give them more headway to sign people. And the local independent labels are getting the resources from their success to kind of do more. But then also, you've got the kind of the less quantifiable effect of just for the young musicians of the next wave who see local artists like singing in their language, writing about what their life experience is. They see that there's a pathway. So I think it's going to be this virtuous cycle where in every market that's seeing really strong domestic scene, you're going to see more artists signed, developed, and more people kind of being inspired to follow in their footsteps.
And one thing we've also seen is, and it's a sort of subset of that, but it's or maybe a knock-on effect of that, which is, for example, in Mexico, a lot of regional Mexican music has had a huge resurgence, perhaps from music that was really focused in terms of popularity before on literally into a certain region or perhaps a certain strata of like an age demographic. And it's been really rekindled by younger artists, more popular artists, nationally popular artists. That's really fascinating as well. We're sort of touching on identity, aren't we? It's something which everybody is searching for in the modern world. They want to feel identifiable. They want to feel connected to a community. And lo and behold, we've come back to music, as I guess we always have as humans. And then this other really interesting thing is in countries that have, like, for example, multiple dialects or languages, like India, we're seeing, communities which, let's face it, in India, a minority language still has 100 million people speaking it. But we're seeing songs in these minority languages that perhaps in the past didn't get a lot of national airplay, blowing up within that language-speaking community, and then going beyond it because of the network effects of YouTube, which is particularly popular for music streaming in India, but also, streaming platforms subscription streaming platforms. What do you think? I mean, that's obviously, that sounds good. I think it is a good thing that we're seeing proliferation of these sort of mid long tail genres and languages, types of music going bigger within those countries. It is diversification in I'm talking in the business sense now. So what might that mean in terms of how those individual countries might develop in terms of how music is consumed, streaming happens, things like that?
Yeah, well, I think you're seeing, it's two things really, and we're going to talk about exports in a minute because that's part of this. I think you're seeing artists forge perfectly viable, sustainable careers in their home country. I think, and we've talked about this before, this idea of you can be a rapper in Poland who's now playing arenas and stadiums, and you have a live business in your home country without having to go and rap in English and try and crack over those markets. So that you see that it lifts up the live market domestically, it lifts up everything around it. But yeah, I think it does also mean that people will turn their thoughts towards exports, because I think when we're about to talk about this, what's been proven in recent years also is that not singing in English is no barrier to reaching not just your diaspora overseas, but English language speaking people in America, UK, everywhere else. So I think it does. It stimulates investment in the local scene, and it maybe does raise those ambitions. You don't have to go abroad to make a career, but conversely, now there's never been a better time to actually find listeners around the world, like you said, because of the platforms and because of the appetite. People are looking for different sounds and different kind of languages, and the barriers have been crawling.
There's a weird duopoly there, isn't there? Or a duality, rather, which is that, yes, now is the best time to reach people all around the world, but actually you might be better served, at least in the short to medium, even medium to long term, focusing on your home community and doing what you know, which is singing. This isn't hard data, but I did wonder watching Eurovision the other day, if more acts than in previous years were singing in their own languages rather than
Sweden, for example. Sweden has traditionally done an English language banger for Eurovision, and it was
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's interesting because obviously we're both British, and the picture in the UK is people have been worrying a bit more because here last year I think there were lots of American artists in the charts and fewer British artists, and there was a big bit of soul searching beginning of this year about why are there so few British artists in the top 10 for last year, and this is for a market that's traditionally been very strong domestically for its home artists, but also internationally. And there's a little bit of I would call it soul searching of saying, is this a problem? What do we do about it? Is it, and in a way, there's partly an exciting thing happening here, which is young British music fans are listening to stuff from around the world. They're listening to reggaeton and Afrobeats and K-pop. And I think the next generation of British artists is going to be really exciting because they'll have assimilated all this global culture, and the music they make will be really interesting. And in turn, that music will be ready to be launched globally because it won't be, a niche. But right at this point, the UK is one market that kind of in complete contrast to France and Germany is sitting there going, oh, is there a problem? What do we do about it? How do we make sure there's more British artists in our charts domestically and also when worrying about exports? So there's kind of interesting thinking because the UK is still, it's one of the sort of third biggest market in the world for recorded music. It's growing well, but it's whereas other countries are celebrating the success of local artists domestically, the UK is slightly worrying about it. And that's an interesting dynamic.
I mean, yeah, this is a good point to move on to the sort of export trends. But let's start with this. I think the bridging thing between these two things is essentially this anxiety, which definitely exists within the English language pop world, which is, wait a minute, if there's a big growth in local music and a renewed attention in local language music and a diversion of funds to grow that in these spaces, that probably means there will be fewer people listening to and streaming and engaging with the English language music, which has dominated pop music since the 1950s onwards, right? So this is a very long-standing paradigm, and this is this a paradigm shift? Because that anxiety you just mentioned about the UK market feels tangible, doesn't it? Because if you look at patterns in the past, it was very Anglo-centric pop music, and those were the big pop stars. There was very few non-English speaking pop stars, and now we have loads of them. And also local markets are focusing even more on their homegrown acts, and that's a good thing for them. But surely it's going to have a chilling effect in some ways on the possibilities for UK acts when they start looking abroad.
Yeah, well, yes and no, I think. I think if you're a UK act now, your horizons are the whole world, like every other, but so are every other artist. So the competition is fierce. And you can't rely on the fact that you are from the UK to get you a foothold over someone from Nigeria, someone from South Korea. So there is that. But I think there's two things here. One is this country isn't as dominant as it used to be. And to some extent, the slightly unsympathetic answer to that is the world is changing. And
yeah, I mean,
that's expect to have dominance. But
there's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? Which is that there has been a democratization of access through technology. And while the UK has traditionally, let's say, punched above its weight in terms of producing great songwriters, great pop stars, and that's kind of undeniable in a sense, there was also a major advantage for the UK industry in that it was operating in the language that was the dominant language in the world, right?
And I don't mean to be unsympathetic, because I think you're right to worry, because I think if you want to see pathways for your next wave of acts, you want young people making music to be like, yes, I can succeed, I can get in the charts here, I can see the world. So I understand why people are concerned. I think a lot of the concern being expressed by the industry in the UK is about telling the government we'd like support because we want to punch our weight on the international stage now, and so we need a bit more money, more funds, more backing. And so that all makes sense. That's very sensible for the industry to do. They're not just whining. They have a very specific policy goal in mind to help them compete. But yeah, I think...
Can I just touch on that point, which is, that should we be acknowledging a hard reality, which is actually the world has changed and the UK will probably not be able to, in the medium term even, occupy such a big percentage of listening time, of attention, of inroads to other parts of the world, because the global stage has changed, and the investment that's needed is just to help the UK compete now, and we're not actually going back to where success levels were in the past.
Yeah, and there are actually, I think Spotify put some stats out last week or the week before, suggesting that the percentage of UK artist streams come internationally are really big. So there is people listening to British music all around the world. But yeah, I mean, it's a very, very interesting place to in. Like, for example, Bad Bunny is playing 2 nights at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London later this year. There are a lot of people of Latin American origin in the UK, but that's not going to be 70,000 people who are kind of from where he is from. That's going to be a whole bunch of people from London who love Bad Bunny. And that's an exciting thing, I think, in terms of culture and yeah. But I think it is on the wider level. Again, a lot of artists would be excited. So again, going back to Mexico, I think it was I think global streams, Mexican artists have I think it's 220% they've increased by since 2019. And like you were talking before, this is not just Mexican artists saying, right, we're going to be in the big global genres, we're going to sing in English, we're going to cross over that way. It is regional Mexican music. Like, people who haven't heard Peso Pluma, who just see a photo of him, might have an idea that he's probably a rapper. But now it's very traditional Mexican music. And that's happening in a whole bunch of it. So it is an exciting time because, again, it's about, creatively it's exciting because artists are not having to compromise in ways around language, around what genre they operate in, to find people around the world. And
that's the export part, isn't it? Peso Pluma, you just mentioned there, is regional music that's had national success, huge national success in Mexico, and then has reached out into kind of the obvious diaspora markets, has had some really high charting albums in the US, for example, but is also hitting markets where there are not maybe major diaspora elements. It's just being recognized as pop music, a bit like how these Gen Z kids these days, they don't care when a song is made. They just want songs that they think are good. So they don't care if it was their parents' music or their grandparents' music or if it came out last week.
And arguably different. I think people often talk about young people quite dismissively and say they've got no attention span and blah, blah. But I think there's a real demand for different things. So if you think about K-pop is a good example, like K-pop is different, isn't it? Like it's its own thing. Like, it does draw on Western genres in some ways, and there are Western songwriters working in K-pop. But K-pop sounds to a lot of Western ears weird and unusual. It's not the same. It's not kind of. It's just different, and yet it's broken through. BTS, Blackpink, other bands in their wake have broken through the West, not because they kind of sounded off those and tried to sound less weird. They were very much doing their thing. And people, and not people in the West, not just people who have got South Korean origins, people were kind of open to that. Like, this thing doesn't sound like every Western pop tune over the last 10 years. It's different.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. I think that it's about kind of, it's about, you don't have to compromise. And that's, I mean, the other thing is you're seeing these things where it's not just about artists. Right? For example, do you remember when Afrobeats first kind of broke through on the global scene? I think there was that moment when WizKid did that song with Drake. And everyone was like, wow, this is a big moment for Afrobeat, WizKid, blah, blah, blah. But now you're seeing things like Amapiano from South Africa. I think a lot of people in the West might still struggle to name the big Amapiano artists. It's not a personality thing. It's a genre.
They know the vibe, though, don't they? They get it.
Yeah, but that's it. They know the sound of it. And also that's now filtering into. So I think that's another example of exports. It's not just about, here is a big star breaking out of this country. It can be about culture. And that's exciting when culture travels and when it kind of collaborates and evolves and changes as it meets other countries. So it's really exciting about the current environment.
For sure. I mean, Amapiano, of course, it feels really embedded now as part of sort of electronic music culture. I mean, I'm talking about in the European sense, because it offers something alternative and complementary to the one that was already established. It is the sort of music, in some ways, some people see it as a sort of the musical chill out room of other electronic music, and it complements it, and people are enjoying bringing those things together. If we talk about it, then take it to the level of sort of a bit higher in the music business, in the sense of, okay, you've got now this regional, I mean, okay, anyone around the world can make Amapiano now, right? Okay, that's we know that happens instantly. the technology and the sample pack spread immediately. But we've got the hub is obviously in South Africa, for instance. Are there now, therefore, businesses cropping up who are, for instance, stacking up catalog of this music, building infrastructure to supply it abroad, to make money off it? What is that happening as a consequence?
Yeah, well, I suppose the things we're seeing are that the companies that are big players in these spaces are capitalizing. As the money comes in from streaming, they can sign develop more artists. We saw it with Mavin Records in Nigeria. And then we saw the next thing, which was that Universal Music Group came swooping in saying, hi, we're going to buy a majority stake in this company.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing, we've been writing, so look, in a weird way, the last couple of years, there have been a few stories about layoffs at major labels in the West. And those have tended to focus on the US and UK and the Western offices. But also a lot of stories about Universal does a deal with this company in India. Warner Music is opening this office in Southeast Asia. Sony is doing this deal. Like, you're seeing a lot of activity from the global majors in these markets where the stuff is happening, the source material of the new global scenes, because they want in on it there. So I think you are seeing that. You're seeing investment being made by local companies first, but then you're seeing the global majors seeing the way the wind is blowing, saying, well, it's no use us being the biggest music company in the Western world if we don't have a foothold in what's happening in South Africa and Nigeria and India and China.
Yeah.
And that's where their investment is shifting. So I think, and that's where that's what's coming up. I think the interesting thing will be where local companies are doing very well, both from domestic revenues but also exports. Do they stay independent and grow, or do they get bought out by a major, or do they do a partnership? There's going to be some real potential for a new wave of, maybe not major labels, maybe they're not going to compete with Universal straight away, but a new wave of super indies coming out of countries that have burgeoning scenes, and they have a potential to grow and do something, but they will also have suitors saying, actually, we're going to wave some money at you because we'd like you to be part of our.
Are you saying with any kind of emerging and successful set of, let's say, businesses like that, particularly around something that's desirable like pop music, the one thing that pop music is really good at when is upsetting the paradigm a bit. I've used that word, I think, 3 times now, but people are keen to say, well, you know what, let's try and build our own network. And the technology, of course, one of the things that's enabled everything we've spoken about is technology. Anyone can shoot a video that can go globally famous on their iPhone and edit it, and all the little components are now easily available to everybody. And so there is an intriguing possibility that while the majors do have tons of money to wave around and to try and bring these people on board to get a foothold there, actually, that for all sorts of reasons, self-determination, cultural reasons, could be a bunch of things. Some people might say, well, actually, we're going to build it ourselves. We can see how you're doing it. We have the technology, and together we have the time and money and infrastructure to do it. And that could be a really fascinating alternative.
Yeah. And also, I mean, Hive is a good example of the South Korean company. It's got an operation in Latin America and it's doing kind of a bunch up there. I think this week there was a report that it wants to open an office in India. So you're seeing the biggest companies from places like South Korea go, actually, we could be a global player and we could forge these things. And I think that's the other thing, and we'll get onto collaboration in a minute, which is relevant to this too. You're seeing these links being made that don't involve big American or British companies.
Yeah.
So you're seeing links between K-pop and Afrobeats and K-pop and reggaeton. You're seeing kind of these two scenes or two companies that are not part of the traditional Anglo-speaking.
Are we seeing this? Is this a sort of end of an empire moment where the real tight grasp that these Anglo businesses, let's call them the British and American and European businesses, have had on global pop music? You just listed a bunch of examples there that sort of suggest that time is already over, and the pie can be grown in terms of the amount of music listened to, maybe a little bit, and the number of people that listen to music, and all those things. But it can only grow so much, and if there's a lot of local attention, and these are businesses who are eager to do it themselves, it suggests a power shift, doesn't it?
Maybe. I mean, it's a really exciting time for independent artists and labels generally, anyway, because streaming is good. I think Spotify's stat is over half its royalties, or around half, go to independent music and so on. So I think it's a really exciting time to be an independent artist or label in a country that's having this exciting time. But at the same time, it's quite an exciting time, I think, for the global majors, because it changes their business. It changes what they do. It makes them more disparate. It gives more power to their subsidiaries around the world. It gives them more impetus to do deals around the world in interesting ways. So in a way, I think it doesn't. It's less that it threatens the global majors. I think it changes their businesses and changes how they operate. But probably in an exciting way. I mean, it's hard if you're someone who's been let go because they're moving investment from the US to somewhere else. But I think if you're what is Universal Music Group in 10 years' time, it's going to be a lot more about all these places of the world, and it's going to be less just about the biggest Western territories. So I think rather than necessarily, it certainly doesn't kill them. Rather than necessarily taking their power away, I think it just changes. It has to change their culture and their business, and that is a positive change for those companies. But you're right. I think the competition, the alternative paths to success, mean that it is going to be a really interesting space. If you're an up and coming Indian rapper or an Afrobeats artist, you're going to have multiple paths to finding a global audience, and one of them may involve working with a major label from the West, but one of them may not. And this is the same for artists everywhere. Really, you have more choices, but it's fascinating.
And of course, one of those strategies, to bring us onto our third topic, is collaboration. We're seeing, if a cursory scroll through new releases on any streaming platform shows many more features or even equal billing lead artists on songs as they collaborate. We're seeing innovative cross-cultural collaborations, Afrobeats artists collaborating with Brazilian artists and finding, essentially brand new genres. They're finding joins between what they do and making new genres and new music, and they're finding cultural connections and cultural clashes. And that's super exciting, right? Creatively, that's really, really exciting. And of course, now that is just part of the standard marketing playbook, which is like, take artists from here, try and move into this market over there. Maybe it's do a collaboration. Maybe they're collaborating with a local artist in the diaspora. Maybe they're collaborating with someone who is outside the diaspora. And, it doesn't always work. I think the example I always cite is that there have been a number of attempts to get German rappers collaborating with UK grime artists, and it never seems to stick. Even though you'd think that, culturally that would be a pretty close, but then there's plenty that have worked. So on one hand, that sounds intensely exciting, and it is intensely exciting to hear these collaborations. And that has always been the case. We've seen it historically. But one thing that all humans get bored of is the same old. And, is there a danger there that all these feats and collaborations are just going to get a bit dizzying? We see it so much and all the time. Does it make it harder to build those individual artist brands? That's a lot of questions there. So discuss is my prompt to you.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about how things have changed. So I was thinking about that Drake and WizKid song. And I think at the time, WizKid was already a star.
For sure.
In some countries, but Drake was a global star. And it was kind of seen as like, wow, Drake is endorsing Afrobeats. But then you think about, I don't know, one of the biggest songs of last year, Bruno Mars and Rosé from Blackpink. I would say that's an equal match collaboration. Like, she's a superstar already. Like, that was not Bruno Mars giving him a leg up to plucky young artist Rosé from Blackpink. So I think you're seeing now that the power dynamic's different. I mean, of course, I think collaborations are hard, aren't they? Because there are collaborations that come out of pure creativity, two artists sparking a chord, writing an amazing song together. And there have always been collaborations that are basically putting two people together for commercial reasons, or getting someone to phone in a verse. I remember when I was young, God, you could tell when someone had phoned in a verse to a song and they'd never met and didn't give a shit. And that's what happens now. So it's always been the risk of collaboration that if you do it purely for commercial reasons and it doesn't catch fire, it will be obvious. And if that is the case,
you would imagine that that's happening more now, don't you? Because not just because of, for a number of reasons, right? Technologically, it's much easier to send files around the world and say, right, get this artist in. This artist is in the studio already. The files are there. We've got a half-hour slot. They're going to go in the booth and do a verse, and then they're going to move on, forget about it, and then it'll be released, and it'll have this effect. So that's not necessarily, I mean, look, that's not artistically necessarily a bad thing.
And if it's good, it will spread faster than before. If it's bad, in this social media era, people will say it's bad very loudly. And so I think the bad examples will get called out more loudly nowadays. But yeah,
but the temptation is to do that more, isn't it? Because it's so sort of, there's very little friction to make that happen. If you're part of a big label and you can say, right, here are all the people we've got available for feats at the moment. Who do you want? And then you put it together and you put your marketing team in gear. And there is a sort of danger there of it just everything being a little bit bland. And okay, you're right. Katy Perry can attest that once people decide they don't like you on social media, they will hound you down.
It's a long way back.
Yeah,
but I think you can do this creatively. I think, and that's the thing. Like I remember in one of our country profiles, I think it was Warner Music Brazil, were talking about how they were putting their artists together with some of those from Warner Music Nashville. Yeah, so it's kind of like, let's put them together in a room. Let's get them writing and see what.
That's a chill sense, right? And that's about patience and time.
And your
artist grass, yeah.
And so you're not saying, right, we're going to get a country artist to do a country remix of our Brazilian song and try and hit two demographics. It was about, well, let's put these musicians together and see what happens. And there was an Alan Walker story. I think he went on a tour of China and he invited a musician to play on his tour because they'd gone viral in a video. And like, that was him seeing a thing. And on the one level, this is amazing commercial sense, right? We should get a Chinese artist to go viral with our song. But in that case, it seemed to be very much a happenstance thing. It just so happened. And so I think an artist are creative people. I think if you're an artist and you go to a different part of the world, why wouldn't you want to make music with people locally to see what happened? Especially nowadays when you can have a studio on a tour bus with you or in your hotel room. It's very easy to be creating music on the road. And so it kind of lends itself to these impromptu collaborations that aren't about what will make you most money, match this and this with that demographic. But that is going on too.
Yet at the same time, there is also, let's assume that there is a perceived pressure and anxiety from the traditional Anglo world to keep expanding, keep making artists relevant around the world because there is increased competition, there is increased pressure of money being diverted to the other markets. Then, realistically, there are going to be times where that cynicism does win out and you get artist X on collaborating with artist Y because it's just, let's try and keep them relevant in this market. That might shake out badly for some people.
The other thing I think as well is we talked earlier on about how young people now can listen to anything from everywhere. And if you map that to also the diaspora effect, so young people who have a cultural background in a particular part of the world, it's easier than ever for them to kind of reconnect with that through sampling music, but also through connecting with artists. So I think we're going to start seeing that where artists are going, right, I am British, a British Indian artist, for example, and I'm going to make a project where I go to India and work with some local artists there. And that is not I think this will make me more money. It's part of their creative journey as an artist. It's part of their life. And it will be interesting because of that. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Like people are going to be exploring their own roots, exploring who they can work with. And the other thing, which plays into what Musicalia does around the music tech side of things, is we're starting to see people develop platforms to make this happen. So I've written, I think in the last year, about 2 or 3 startups that were specifically we're going to help musicians find people to collaborate with around the world. And, part of the pitch is sometimes we're going to use a clever AI to match you with people. So we'll say, you should work with this person in this part of the country because you'd be suited. And I never know quite how good that stuff will be. But I think people are starting to see that this collaborative impulse is there and there's commercial benefit to it. So what infrastructure do we need to create to make it easier? And that might be labels putting the artists together. Like Warner can do this. It can say, right, this bit of Warner over here will put artists in a songwriting camp with those from this other arm here. So major labels are doing that, and that's very sensible. But I think you're going to see people trying to work on them. Well, how, if you're an independent artist, how can you find people to work with who are like-minded? And I mean, I'm always an optimist. I feel like, there'll be bad commercial people put together that have no interest in.
Because we're hearing at the same time, aren't we, that major labels are investing less time into artist development than ever before, because I'm paraphrasing in very broad brushstrokes here, because they're looking to see artists that are already blowing up within social networks and systems, and then snapping them up and then pouring fuel onto that fire and growing their careers, as opposed to taking these big risks, which is saying, hey, let's develop some artists, let's put them in a room, let's make some music, and it makes the art good, and then the art will lift their careers. So there is a little bit of tension there, isn't there, between, there is some truth to my broad brushstrokes there, and saying, hey, if we get these cool artists from around the world and fly them together and put them in a room and give them some nice food and time, that we'll have some good songs come out of it.
This is something that publishers can do. So songwriting camps, publishers can bring people together. And I think the other thing is that some of the big streaming services are starting to see this as part of what they do. Like, they bring artists together and say, well, it would be interesting if we, like Amazon Music, for example, has done collaborative tracks as its originals before. So I think you've also got that side of it. Streaming services going, you know what? We've got a load of data. We know that these two artists' audiences overlap in an interesting way. So why don't we get them in the studio in Stockholm or in LA, wherever it is?
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing. You're seeing this, I guess would you call it C&R, collaboration, and, collaboration A&R, figuring out who would work well with who.
Copyrighted, Stu. Let's get this nailed down. I think you're onto something.
But I think labels will do that. Management companies will do that. Publishers will do it. But also streaming services are doing it. And they can put some welly behind the song to, in a way, make that story self-selecting. They can put two artists in a studio in Stockholm and then pump that song out to people, and collaborative success is born. So yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff going on and lots of opportunities.
Again,
I agree with you though. It has to be good art. And if it's bad art, people will not listen and they will ridicule it on social media. So that's the risk. Okay.
Yeah. But again, the takeaway here is that however you slice it, we're looking at maybe the most significant shift in power, decision-making, supply and demand, and approach to the pop music industry in the entirety of the pop music industry. It's really happening right now, isn't it? And it is going to have some fundamental changes into the way that all these big players and the systems and the infrastructure work. I think that's sort of undeniable, isn't it?
And maybe the success criteria now is not, whereas once it might have been, how big are you and powerful are you, and how can you flex those muscles to make people hear your artist? And now it's about flexibility and rolling with these changes and adapting and being nimble in striking deals and nimble in the deals you strike with artists. And so maybe that's one of the changes, is that the biggest companies don't necessarily go away, but their expression of power is not about the big fist. It's about being nimble. And of course, then you are competing with lots of independent companies who can be very nimble. So yeah, it's going to change the way it will work.
It's always nice to bring this back to the artist perspective. And I'm sure that in some ways, this is all music to the artist's ears, in the sense of the key criteria now might be maintaining independence, something that artists historically want, having choice around who you're connecting to, which is something artists have always wanted, being able to connect with your culture in a way that you recognize, in languages that you recognize, which they've historically wanted. And
yeah, although it can also be daunting, I think, kind of, because I think in the old days as an artist, you would try and be big in your home territory, then you'd go to another country, it was quite ordered, wasn't it, in terms of international expansion. Whereas now, you're an artist, you're doing all right, and suddenly you've got loads of listeners in the Philippines, and also in Mexico, and also in South Africa. And as an artist, you're thinking, do I have to go and tour these places now? What do I do? How do I do it? And I think, in a way, there's that paralysis of choice, is that you can reach people all over the world. That's a good thing, but it can also bring these challenges in how you decide what to do. So that's something artists are grappling with. And that's where I think, like you say, those very careful, who am I working with? How can I do this cost effectively and creatively? Because there is no limit to international horizons, but at the same time, you can't just go everywhere all at once. You have to kind of be quite strategic about it. So that's for the artist, the challenge is that there's lots of opportunity, but you have to figure out how you can do it without working yourself into the ground, and without kind of, taking risks taking financial risks. So that's me being a pessimist now. Artists have to grapple with this stuff. Like, wow. I mean, like you say, I love artists. Their most listeners are in Mexico City, but it's still a big step to say, right, I'm going to go and tour in Mexico, because that needs partners, booking agents, all the stuff around that, which as an independent artist, you may not have access to. So that's the other thing. Maybe it's a problem for the industry, is if an artist can suddenly blow up in a different part of the world to where they're from, how do you best make sure they can capitalize on that? And that's a question for a lot of different people.
All right, thanks, Stu. Plenty to digest there as ever from our head of insight. And if you found that useful, please do share it on with someone else who you think will get something out of it. There are links below the podcast to the new report, which can be accessed by Music Ally subscribers. And if you're not a subscriber, it's not a problem. There's still tons for you on musically.com, which now has exciting hub pages for our main focuses of news, music marketing, and so on for you to investigate. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with me, we'd of course love to hear from you. You can email me on Joe, @musically.com, and we have as well a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up a soupçon of the best analysis, news, marketing insight, and skills from across all of Music Ally's services. So sign up and you will immediately become a better person. Links are in the description as always. That's it. Thanks again to Stu. Thanks for listening. And I've been Joe Sparrow. You have been you. And until next time, a fond farewell.